Hi, everybody. Helen, William, Eric, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm still so thrilled with what we enjoyed over that sunny weekend at Bicton, because for me, the sport finally hit the note, which we haven't seen for a couple of years, what with COVID and one thing and another, finally hit the note of testing the cross-country prowess of the riders and the horses, which we I think all in this room feel is the absolute key, the heartbeat of the sport. And if it doesn't remain the heartbeat of the sport, we become sadly second-rate show jumping and dressage riders, because those proper dressage and show jumping riders are always going to be ahead of us. And my fear is that cross-country becomes an exhibition phase. And I think, Helen, you did as much as anybody's ever done to putting a sword through that fear of mine. So how did you feel, Helen, that how did it resonate with you? What did you feel like on Sunday morning?
Absolutely terrified, Lucinda, I'll be honest. It's such a responsibility. It's such a responsibility that is on your shoulders. You so desperately want to have pitched it right. For me, it was really important. It was the Bramham replacement fixture. It's been a few years since I've ridden at Bramham, but I remember it well, and it is a proper 4-star track. Right from the get-go, I felt passionate that it needed to be exactly that. And as you will know, we have the terrain at Bicton. We're spoilt with that. So, the terrain always plays a large part. But for me, it's the most fantastic experience. I've learned a huge amount, and I'm incredibly proud of sitting back and watching the course ride. I'm not going to lie, I didn't enjoy it at the time, but I've actually since then been able to enjoy the playback on Horse and Country. I've learned it. I've learned a lot, and it'd be really interesting to hear other thoughts as well, to be honest.
It's a huge stress that you guys go through, and I know that the relief that certainly Ian Stark and Eric and Helen all feel when they've got through the end of that cross-country day and Sunday morning dawns. And you are really in the firing line big time as to how the future of the sport goes, and it really is in your hands. William, I absolutely know, will agree. Eric, Helen, and the other top-level course designers. And actually, the fascinating thing, and it was referred to in an article in the Horse and Hound today, that the lower levels have actually become tougher this year in many situations, and going to need to prepare riders and horses for what we had at Bicton. Eric, what's your feelings on where we should go?
For a few years now,
encourage, but we want to educate, the 2 E's.
Exactly, but to me, for a few years now, in the 80s, early 90s, I think we looked at 5-star, and then we modeled what 4-star was out of 5-star. So we said, well, it's not a 5-star fence, so it's a 4-star fence, and we worked downwards like that. I think in the last few years, we've been in danger at some places, not all places, but some places, of looking at what 80 is and saying, well, if 80 is that, then 90 must be this, and then 100 must be that, and working from the opposite end of the sport. And what that does is it doesn't provide your education from the right end of the spectrum. So I think it's come a little bit unbalanced, and it's a very difficult position as designers, because at the moment there are 2 very different camps in the sport. There's a camp that feels that cross-country should be relevant. I remember a German official saying to me last year, we were in Argentina, and he said, but you're the only crazy country that feels that cross-country should affect the result. And I said, but for sure, what's the point of doing it if it doesn't? I can't see why you would run cross-country if it doesn't work like that. So that I remember at Oldham years ago, jumping a sort of a mock version of a Vicarage V. We always used to have those fences that came out of 5-star events and were remodeled at other events. And so that education in those earlier days was very much about training horses for the higher levels. Whereas now, actually, it's been not about training. It's been about people going out and having lunch and having a nice day and everybody jumps clear and all that sort of thing. Well, there's definitely a place for that. But I don't think it's at the higher levels of the sport. I think really from the time you get into that qualifications and for 100 level, you know, it should be about the education to bring up those horses. And even your riding club riders, your riders that are riding for fun want to feel an achievement and they go to an event. I always say when I'm doing course designer courses that there isn't a person alive that drove 6 hours to an event because they were excited about the dressage being particularly flat or the show jumping being particularly bright colours. They go because they're excited about cross country, and we must keep that in the sport to keep the sport alive.
Yeah, you're so right about the way things have changed, because I remember very well, William, you were at Kentucky with the chestnut horse, so probably what, 8-9 years ago, and we had a big quarry, and we always do at Lexington, and I remember you saying, you know, I can't remember when I've ever jumped a quarry on this horse. And I thought, God, that is the way cross country is going. I actually can't remember when there was last a sunken road, but that might be for a reason that I don't know, not being a course designer. But there's an awful lot of what I call natural features. And one of the places that really disappointed me was Harry Dupin, the Worlds, 5 years ago, whatever it was now, in France, when he had this beautiful stretch of countryside and he just kept putting in fences that weren't in the hedge line. There was one or two, but there's no sort of crossing the country, and quarries, sunken roads, that's all part of crossing the country, I would have thought. William, do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that, and I'm going to interrupt there because we are trying on the FEI eventing committee to start to include jumps that aren't included as jumping efforts, and we're trying to use steps up and down and ditches not to be included in the number of jumping efforts allowed, because we have lost sunken roads. All the coffins have been filled up, the ditches. So horses are getting to certain events having never jumped a coffin or a sunken road because they're wasted efforts. So we're really fighting. Interesting. We're fighting as you speak now. We are fighting to be allowed 3. They're going to call them hazards that won't be included in the maximum effort, and that I think will give course designers something. We don't want to be racing around in circles like Mark Phillips does at Burley. That's becoming all the fashion at Barbary and places. We want to go cross country, and we want to have jumps that are cross country jumps. So we want to include these features without them costing course designer difficulty of their course.
So William, is there anything going on in the FEI about fences being painted blue, yellow, red, looking like show jumps? Is there an anti or a pro?
Talk about sight a lot. There is, but there's going to be no rules on that. But there's obviously they're trying to make jumps stand out, not blend in, whether they're logs or.
How many years have we all jumped timber? What's wrong with timber? You know, that's slightly my concern, that we're making all these colours on the basis of Exeter University having told us that a horse can see one colour better than another. But the thing that really scared me about their thesis is that they came up with the fact that white was the colour the horse could see best. Well, having slogged my guts out teaching for over 30 years, I can tell you that some horses cannot do white. And
no, they can't do white into light. You have to
accept that. Some horses, not all, just don't understand white. And it bothers me that we're sort of colouring all these cross-country fences. Hang on a minute, we can go show jumping, as Eric, you said the other night to me, and it's a jolly good sport.
I think colour is a bit of a fashion. I think course designers are all getting pats on the backs for making jumps more visible, and they're all trying to outdo each other on what horses jump better and don't jump better. But I agree, I think rustic, what's the matter with rustic? Horses can see rustic. They probably can't see it in the shade under a tree, as well as they can see, you know, bright pink.
And on that, William, I would have said there are ways of achieving contrast with rustic.
I agree.
So, you know, I can understand why, you know, yes, colour's an easy way of achieving that, but actually in terms of texture, you can achieve the contrast in other ways.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I do think that the colours has been a way out and a way of kind of creating a bit of variety and what has otherwise maybe been quite a boring course.
Yeah.
Hugh Thomas told me when I took over at Badminton that there's a time and a place for everything. He said that you can go with colour if it's appropriate. So you can put a maypole in front of Badminton House and you can have white rails in front of Badminton House. You cannot have colour and a yellow submarine on the Vicarage ditch line because it's just out of place. So I think the greatest thing about our sport is the variety. So William says about Barbary and maybe Stragholm as those courses that are quite twisty and run over sort of almost like a Walt Disney type version of cross country.
Repetitive.
Yeah, but there's a place for that. There's a place for those courses. There's a place for a course where you can sit in one spot and watch the horses jump. And there's a place for badmintons and birdies where you cross the country. I think the greatest thing, one of the things I love about our sport is when you get off a ferry to go abroad to an event and you've never been there before, as you get off the ferry, your excitement is, what's the site going to be like? What's the cross country going to be like? What's the terrain going to be like?
You're excited by the unknown.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we go show jumping quite a lot. My son show jumps, and when we get off, we know we're going to be in some kind of industrial estate somewhere. We're going to be jumping on a sand pit that will be somewhere between 80 and 100 meters long and 60 and 70 meters wide. And it will have brightly colored fences you don't get that with eventing. You know, it's about that. And good event courses follow the nature of the site that they have, and they don't force the nature of the site that they have. And some places Barbary was a very good showcase, is a very good showcase for a particular type of thing in the sport. And I think it has a great place in the sport, but it shouldn't be all events. And similarly, I don't think all events should jump fence 1 and 2. You know, as an owner, when you stand in the old sort of, you know, the events of the 70s, early 80s, when you stood and watched your horse disappear over fence 1 and 2, and you watched it jump over the last fence when it came home, that was not an owner experience. So there's a place for everything in the sport, but it should all be educational. It should train your horses to compete at different types of events.
Can I take up an area that I find really fascinating, and it's a phrase that we've used for many, many years. How do you test the best without annihilating the rest? And Helen produced a really strong 4-star course, and it was really needed, as we've discussed. There were young horses coming to their first 4-star. You gave them lots of long routes. But there were quite a lot of long routes because there was quite a lot of difficult fences. And what I was thinking, having read Andrew Nicholson's Horse and Hound article, where I felt very fairly explained what he felt, that you just never got into the flow if you kept taking the long routes. And quite possibly the very first combination was a very, very difficult one. The acute angled hedges, quite dark, also maybe a little sight thing there too with the tree. I don't know if the shadow affected it there, but I don't know what you feel, because I love the way your long routes actually went out quite a long way. And you sort of could flow, but you couldn't really, because you'd taken your eye off the ball because you'd gone the long route. So I sort of saw what he meant, and I would love to know what you feel next time you'll do to ameliorate that.
So it's a really interesting one, Lucinda, because I guess in my sort of thought process there, it was very much trying to cater for, absolutely, you know, we had some world-class field, but I was also very mindful that there would potentially be horses there doing their first 4-star. We had the under 25s, so there had to be a way round for people to complete. And I guess in my head, it was a little bit either or. So you were either going straight and you were on something that was, you know, plan A, or you were on something that was younger, more inexperienced. And I suppose in my head, I thought you would take the long route first time round. What I think perhaps I hadn't got in my head was that if you had a problem and then took the long route, if that makes sense, because for me, those long routes were really actually very fluent if you planned to take them. They were on the same rein, you could keep the flow, but I was surprised, especially when it rode as strong as it did on Sunday, that more people perhaps didn't think on Saturday, that more people didn't then think on Sunday, oh gosh, I'm just going to go long straight away.
I'm going to interrupt you there a minute, Helen, quickly.
Yeah.
I think because we've done so little for 2 years, a lot of people have forgotten that they aren't that good. I think that they all got an idea that they could go direct everywhere,
Correct. Yeah.
and you really couldn't.
No,
unless
you
you were
couldn't.
good,
Yeah.
you needed to go some long routes, and I
Yes.
think people forgot that.
Yeah.
And like coming out of the water, someone said the other day there was 27 runouts. Was that right? Coming out of the water? Or a ridiculous
Possibly not.
number.
Yeah. There were a lot. I'm just looking at it. There weren't
And
quite that, but
to
the column is
me,
quite tall. Yeah.
That's a reflection on how thick some riders are.
Yeah, totally.
And we haven't been reminded that. We've all whizzed around Burnham Market and Aston the Walls, and we've all felt like Michael Young.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're being reminded that we're not. And I'm sorry, but there are
That's
some riders who are jolly stupid. The problem with Bicton, and I'm a bit, I think you did an amazing job, is that your long routes were long. They were what I call proper long routes.
Yes.
But if you add them together, there was quite a lot of them. By the time you've gone long at the water, long at the Coffin,
at the corner,
long at the corner, and long
at the next
arena, you've been out there for half an hour. And I think people were just unaware that the direct route was quite A-level, because they all thought they were better than they are.
Yeah. And you know, on that though, William, what really surprised me was, there was so much talk about the Coffin. There was so much talk about, the straight route through the Coffin being unjumpable. There was no line, etc., etc. Well, actually, I think everybody was surprised with how well the horses read that and how relatively few penalties. I mean, if you look at the stats for that, there were literally a handful of glance-offs.
I'm disappointed to say you will have set a trend with that fence. We're going to see that fence again.
I'm sorry.
I honestly looked at that fence and thought that's one of the most difficult fences I've ever seen, because how do you tell the horse that over the top of that ditch he's got a hard angle like that? And one after the other, they told their horses, and their horses took it. I went, oh my goodness, I've got a lot to learn.
Anyway, my point is, I think there was an accumulation of long routes which people needed to take. If you can take Nicholson as the example, because he was the one complaining the most about it, but he ended up having to go probably long everywhere because his horse wasn't basically ready. And therefore he had his run out, then he went long, or the other way around. He went long and then had a run out.
He did retire after that fence 10 run out, and he made that plan to retire if he had.
Game over. But it was, and I agree, he should have retired, did the right thing, and many more should have done as well. But I think there was questions, and maybe in the mix, you could have had some long routes that weren't as long.
Less circuitous,
You could have had a middle sort of, yes, you want one or two proper long routes.
Yes.
But, your Coffin was a proper long route. Your Water was a long route. There was no long route at 7 and 8.
Now, that's an interesting one. That's a really interesting one. I'm going to pick up on that because, in fairness, Eric, in his capacity of TD, said, do you not think there should be a black flag alternative at fence 7?
Right.
Okay. And that was something we did bat round a bit, didn't we, Eric?
Yeah.
And
you could have had one there, in my opinion.
I did a European pony championships years ago, and I had a first combination that was 2 bucket type fences. And I had a long route for it, and nobody took the long route. And I remember chatting to the coaches afterwards and talking about it because it caused a certain amount of problems. And they said nobody takes a long route at the first combination because it causes issues. If you start your clients off, your horses off, and you take a long route at an early combination, it puts them on a backward foot. So quite often nowadays, I will go a little bit softer. I will go another stride or 2 with my first combination, bearing in mind that even your greenest person is going to go out, because your smartest coach is never going to say, you got to go long here. Because if you went long at the corner, you were never going to go long at the 2 hedges. You're never going to go short at the 2 hedges. Do you see what I mean? So it set you in a rhythm that said you were going to go long everywhere. And then, as William said, you were going to be out there an hour. So first combination, I think if you'd have been retrospectively, if you were a stride further, it would have given you a little bit more variety, and you would have got them into that rhythm a little bit more. But
very interesting. I've never heard anyone say that. That's really interesting to hear.
Nobody ever takes a long route with the first combination.
No, that is interesting. And sorry, just another on that particular fence. So after Eric had sort of raised that with me and said, oh, you know, have you thought about having an option there? I went back and had a look and, you know, had a look again. And I thought, well, for me, if you glanced off to the right the first time, can you get back to it? Am I going to be sending them home at fence 7, or is it just going to be a 20 penalties? And it's really interesting because I have to confess, I actually jumped the fence on a horse that I had over at Bicton the week before, which I haven't evented for 3 years. And I wouldn't have gone from the stump to the corner on him, but I went round the back of the tree, the massive big tree, came, hugged that, came in a straight line and popped him over the corner. And I thought, oh, that's all right. You can get back to that. No problem. He's not evented for 3 years. I don't do it anymore properly. And I thought, well, there we are. It's, for me, you could have come back to it the second, or, you know, certainly the second time, if not the third time, and popped it. And I was surprised then that that didn't happen, because if they didn't read it the first time, they sort of panicked, whipped round off the same rein, so came again off the left rein and went out through the right shoulder. And I thought, well, why has nobody thought what I thought and go round the back of the tree, come in a straight line to it with the right shoulder.
And jump it like an oxer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just jump it like an oxer.
Yeah.
But is that, but so my question is, would I have thought that before when I was eventing, you know, all those years ago? Or is that something now that I would only think of because I've gone down the course design route? I'm not sure I would have thought that before.
Personally, I think that when you get up the levels a little bit, they tend to, when they've had a run out, they tend to walk home. Yeah. Certainly at 5-star level, if they have a run out in the first combination or the second combination, quite often they'll walk home from that.
And reboot.
And reboot and go somewhere else. And that didn't happen in the 70s and 80s or the 80s, you know, so much because there wasn't anywhere else to go. Whereas now there's always another 5-star to go to. So you don't want
this year.
Well, no, in all fairness, what's her name? Third at Lemulin. English guy, you know, show jumping people.
Oh, Emily Chandler.
Emily had a stop at the corner and rerouted to Lemulin.
Yeah, she did.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, she did.
So that was an inspired idea, but that's, you know, something you pay for a little bit.
I want to take you all on to one other subject that interests me, particularly from William's perspective, who rode that course very successfully. And now you tell us that the FEI is considering allowing hazards so that so there could be more coffins and things like that. One of the things that I'm worried about is the intensity of the questions, that because we're now down to 10.5, sometimes 11 if we're lucky minutes, we're no longer 12, 13, my day 14, the horses aren't getting the option to have the run and jump every now and again, which even at Badminton we always had. The very occasional, have to be said, but it was a run and jump. There's so much intensity, and it worries me watching Lemulin, which I thought was full of interesting questions and horses and riders answering them on the whole incredibly well. But it did just say to me, we must keep our horses smiling. We must keep them sweet as we ask them these tremendous questions, one after the other. And could we lengthen the cross country back again to nearer 12 and give us more chance to have the galloping fences?
You can still go to 12 minutes. You can still go to 12 minutes. And these questions
but we don't, do we? We're mostly at 10 and a bit. I mean, William, what did you feel from riding it? Did you feel it was very intense or not?
No, I didn't think it was that intense, but I was on a pretty good horse. So I'm not going to answer you more than that. I think it was the busiest course I've done for a while, but I think it was flowing. We were going from A to B to C. We weren't doing any horrible little loops and switchbacks. It was proper cross country. It did come quite thick and fast early on. And you had to have a horse that would go in a good rhythm, I think. And I think that people have forgotten how to go in a rhythm. They're very good at sprint and anchor. And I think
on that, William, sorry, I'm just going to I'm going to be very rude and interrupt. You know how to have a horse properly fit. That for me was a key aspect. There were an awful lot of horses there that I saw that were not fit enough.
No, they were fat.
Yeah.
In all fairness, you lacked horses that had mileage at hilly courses.
Yes.
Because Chatsworth hadn't run,
Yeah.
because there's been a whole catalogue of horses, of classes that haven't run for a couple of years. So a lot of those horses were qualified in flatter, more sort of factory type sites and less hilly sites. And so I think you came off the brunt of that a little bit with, which I think was a good thing.
Yeah,
People going without the experience, and they had the experience of jumping the fences. They could jump, an Oxer 3-stride turning arc to a corner every day of the week, because they had 1,000,000 miles and 150 times they'd done that. But what they hadn't done is ran downhill to that fence.
I agree, and I spoke to Buddy
Absolutely.
Upton, who won the under-25s, because I know her and her mum really well.
She was very impressive.
She had never ridden a course. She's never ridden Bramham. She had never ridden a course like that in her life.
Wow.
And she said, I've done everything. I've done 4-star. I've won 4-star, but I've never ridden a hill.
No.
She said, what is your one advice to me?
Wow.
And I said, the most important thing is that you ride your horse, not the course, and not your stopwatch.
Yeah.
And you
What you
use the
feel.
horse up. And that kind of education in the last 2 years, unless you've done Burley, no one has done that. No one has done Bramhams for 2 years. And most of those guys, the under-25s, aren't old enough to have done Bramham anyway.
Yeah.
So they've got there off Houghton, Aston the Walls, and Burnham Market.
It's true.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. There's a whole different thing between coming downhill or running uphill to an Oxer, which puts a different dimension into it. Because when you come downhill to an Oxer, you can land over it, you can land 3 meters behind it, or you can land over it, you can land 1.5 meters behind it, because the hill affects horses in a different way.
Yeah.
When you come on the flat to it, you have a predictable landing spot and a predictable reaction to that. Whereas the hill makes that whole thing less predictable and more back to feel. And feel is something that's created not in seconds and weeks of training. That's created over long periods of training.
And our sport is losing that. We are not training feel to develop because no one's having to have it. You walk the course at Bicton and you don't know where your horse is going to land. You don't know, is he going to land out? Is he going to land inside? That drop down into the main arena, very simple, down to the skinny hedge. Everyone was, oh my goodness, is it 2? Is it 3? Where's he going to land? And I said, well, when you know where he's lands, you'll know whether you're doing 2 or 3. So you can't plan it now, but no one nowadays, the young guys, can't adjust to that at that split moment. They need to know what is it going to be.
And William, that was exactly the same actually at fence 7 with the stump to the corner. If I cannot tell you how many people said to me, so is it 4 or is it 5, Helen? It's whatever it needs to be.
It's the rider. I totally agree.
Use the tree, bounce off the tree, keep the engine, keep the outside shoulder. You'll get there on what you get there on.
Hugh Thomas would tell you the answer to that. It's yes. When they walk up to you and say, is it 3 or is it 4? Or is it 5 or is it 6? The answer is always yes.
Yes.
It's never it's 3 or it's 4. It's always yes.
Right. No, I think your 7 and 8 was a brilliant fence for that very reason. You had to decide, how have I landed? You didn't know what you're going to be on the approach. You didn't know that you were going to go off down the hill. Some people turned and it was 4 every day.
Yeah.
I actually decided, having watched the morning, that 5 was going to be the common sense way of doing it. And then suddenly that was a bit black and white. Once you decided 5 and you did not turn too early, 5 was there.
Yeah.
But it was such a clever fence. I really think, that is a little bit coming up in the sport now, those moments where you've got to think on your feet.
Totally.
And we've all forgotten how to do that. We love to walk courses and count strides. That is our generation.
Yeah. It has become very.
And we must remember what the final deal is, that we're trying to qualify for the greatest events in the world. Not everybody, but quite a lot are. And it is important that qualification route is a proper test, because I'm afraid in the last couple of years, I wouldn't have particularly wanted to go from Blenheim to Burley or Badminton. But I would have happily gone from Bramham and happily gone from Bicton, because I really feel you have put your fingers on it, all of you. You are having to feel your way around. You cannot calculate your way around. You're having to have a very good understanding of what it might be, and then you've got to ride by feel. And feel, as you so rightly say, is a very hard commodity to come by these days. In the good old days, it was a lot easier.
Well, listen there.
Yeah.
Why was it easier?
Because
what did you do that the youth don't do today that made it easier for you to develop those skills? And I think you're right, and I have a feeling about that.
Exactly, having been lucky enough to be a disciple pupil of Lady Hugh Russell up at Wiley, we never ever walked a fence. We went out and rode them under her auspices, and she might say to us sometimes there's 2 strides there, but on the whole we just went from a bit of string on a fence to another bit of string on a fence, and we held our line. All we really worried about was having the quality of canter that enabled the horse to have options, and we worried about keeping him on his line. In those days, we didn't talk a lot about has he seen it, because we didn't have the skinnies.
Yeah.
Now we add to the quality of canter and keeping him on his line, has he actually seen it? And that's something that the 7B or 8 or whatever it was, a lot of horses just didn't see it. They flashed straight by, and I, like you, Helen, said, listen, jump the first one, head for the tree, turn out the tree, and there's the corner. Yeah. What's difficult? Why do you have to worry about 4, 5 or 6 strides? But that I think is the answer to your question, Eric. That's how I would have ridden that fence, in a very good quality of canter, headed for the tree, turned out the tree, and there would have been 2 or 3 strides to be over the corner.
For those that don't remember Wiley, what was the terrain like at Wiley?
Very hilly.
Exactly.
Very hilly. We didn't do an awful lot of training on the hills because the water was at the bottom, but we used to walk down there. But on the other hand, when we had the 4 or 5 star events there, it used that terrain big time, and it was quite difficult to ride, and we learned a lot. I can't say I enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed Badminton, which still has terrain, but more subtle terrain than, let's say, Burghley or Bramham or Bicton.
But to train, I mean, to me, Wiley was the ultimate of training. You know, those big chicane at the top of the hill that ran down, you know, that stuff that you trained over those hills taught that team and that generation a skill that actually they don't learn at Aston. I mean, and Aston has its place in its all-weather cross-country school, and there's a lot of, you know, Austin's place at Attington, you know, has its place in training, but it's not like training at Wiley.
I had my first major fall at Wiley because I came up a hill, very steep, one like your last one at Bicton, and I didn't do anything about getting my horse together. Surprise, surprise, fell over. You never forget that lesson, and that was about 18. I'm loving every minute of this, but I'm fearing we might have come to the end of our quota of time. Has anybody got anything that they would really love to ask or step into, or are we there?
I would love to know, obviously, Bicton, we're all now getting quite excited about Bicton slotting into the Burghley date. I know that's a rumor or anything else. That is certainly talk. And I'd like to know, obviously, Helen will be retired because she's got a new career. And we're very excited about that. But I just wondered what people were talking about, several fences at Bicton being 5-star fences. Oh my goodness. How many more 5-star fences can you fit into a place?
Good question.
Do you know, William, the wonderful thing, and one of the things I enjoyed the most about producing that 4-star track at Bicton was that, you know, when I put my hand up and said, oh, we can do it, we can step in for 1 year only, everybody was like, oh my God, you're mad. How on earth can you possibly do that? You haven't even got an advanced track. So how can you afford to put in a 4-star track? And I talked to Eric about this. It made us think outside the box, okay? And it made us be really resourceful. So we utilised an awful lot of natural timber that was around and about the place. And for example, the stump to the corner, you know, that was a really funky bit of timber.
Yeah, really good, yeah.
And that's not something you could go and buy or you could build. You know, it had a real character and real sort of integrity to it. And I really enjoyed the process of putting that track together without having a massive budget. I hardly had any budget, but we did it, you know, and we absolutely nailed it. You know, you couldn't say it was, you know, a bunch of portables sort of chucked around the place. It was a proper track. And I think it just shows what can be done and what can be achieved when you're a little bit resourceful about it.
Yeah.
So,
but it was every bit as big as Bramham could ever have been, you know, and you know, sorry, Eric, but it was certainly a gear up on Blenheim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't do Blenheim anymore. I haven't done Blenheim for 5
No,
years.
we're not blaming you.
So let's
I'm
not.
not blaming you, but I'm just saying Blenheim's a little bit your old baby.
In capacity of compa, I just huge congratulations to Helen, a little bit of mentorship occasionally from Mark, to Eric.
Absolutely. No, everybody, Lucinda, trust me, the whole thing is such a collaborative approach, and it is such a team effort. And
Yeah.
trust me, having people that, you know, I can bounce ideas off, and yeah, it is a vital part of it.
Your word collaborative is exactly why we're doing this Zoom right now. We so want to get all the powers of the sport together, so we're all going down the same channel, so we can keep cross country as the heartbeat. And if we go off in different directions and fight each other, we won't. We need to go down this together. So collaboration is the big deal, I think, of the future. And hugest thanks to you both for such a great job, and William for writing it so well. And the grass was beautiful, and the horses were happy. Thank you.
They learnt a lot. Thank you so much, Helen. That was a really good weekend.
No, brilliant. It was it was a week to remember, that's for sure.
In all sorts of ways.
In all sorts of ways. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.